Hello Miata Internet, this is Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata, and today I'm going to be talking to you about unsprung and rotating mass. This is something that Miata people have been nerding out about for a long time. Not everyone understands what it is, why they should care, so that's hopefully what we're going to cover today. If you have any questions when we're shooting this live, please go ahead and put them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. If you are watching this in the future, put your questions in the comments. We will attempt to answer them in the comments, assuming we happen to see them. So, comments are good, questions good. That gives me something to talk about. So this is my stuff for unsprung and rotating mass. So first we're going to talk about what is it? What am I talking about here? Well, it's fairly easy. I'll use my small car here to illustrate. Unsprung mass is basically anything that moves when the suspension moves. So in this case, the bulk of it is the wheel and tire and everything inside it. To some extent, it's the control arms. Those are what's called semi-sprung mass. But basically, unsprung mass is the stuff that moves up and down when the suspension moves. Rotating mass is all the stuff that spins with the wheel. So you've got the wheel, you've got the tire, you've got the brake rotor, you've got the hub. That's effectively your rotating mass. As you might notice, all of your rotating mass is also unsprung, but not all of your unsprung mass is rotating. So, why do we care? Well, let's start talking about the unsprung part of things first, because it's easier to understand, a little bit easier. Well, I've got to start somewhere. So, unsprung mass, every time you hit a bump, you're motoring along and you hit a bump, it's got to accelerate all of that mass to follow whatever's going on in the road, whether it's dropping down, whether it's going up. But basically, you've got to take all that and move it very quickly. If it doesn't move quickly enough, then what happens is your car ends up moving with it. And so you end up with a very rough ride. You end up with a car rocking around and your wheel losing contact with the ground. Obviously, tires losing contact with the ground. Tires losing contact with the ground is a bad thing because they're the things that keep you attached to the earth. So, your cornering grip goes way down when your tires aren't touching anything. So we want this to be able to react as quickly as possible to any changes in the road surface. And one of the reasons that Miata people are so obsessed with rotating or with unsprung weight, unsprung mass, is because it's best expressed as a percentage of the total vehicle. So if you think about it, if this was, this little car, if this was running Miata size wheels and tires, obviously if you hit a bump, the whole thing would just fall over. It wouldn't bother accelerating that suspension up. If you're driving a big 3/4 ton dually pickup truck, it's got massive wheels and tires, a lot of unsprung weight, but it doesn't really matter so much because you're talking about a 4-ton vehicle. So it's much harder to make the whole chassis move, and so it's relatively easier to make the wheel and tire move. So I like to look at it as a percentage of the vehicle weight, and the Miata being one of the lightest vehicles in the market, it's more important to us than it is for, say, a BMW M5, which is a considerably heavier vehicle. So that's why Miata owners are so nerdy about it. We'll also talk about the rotating mass, what that does. This is kind of interesting. If you've ever played with a gyroscope, you've probably noticed that I couldn't find one in time to do this video. I apologize for that. A gyroscope will try to keep doing the same thing. That's actually their job in a lot of situations, is to maintain a specific plane. But they will try to keep doing what they're doing, and then all of a sudden, if you push them hard enough, they'll fall over, they'll do something else, they'll allow you to move it. And a heavy unsprung weight, heavy rotating weight can do the same thing. When you get extreme levels of rotating mass, you start getting weird steering behavior where it resists going off center and then all of a sudden it goes off center in a hurry. I've experienced this with a very, very heavy brake setup that it had enormous rotors. I think they were cut down from a Mustang GT. They were 12.5 inches, solid steel, iron. And it had very strange gyroscopic effects on the steering. So that's one effect you get from rotating mass. The other one is a flywheel effect, not just for a gyroscope, but it takes energy to spin it up, and it wants to keep spinning. So it will have an effect on your acceleration. It will have an effect on your braking. If you lock the wheel, it'll take a little bit more to get it moving again. It'll take more energy to slow the wheel down. As it turns out, when you actually do instrumented testing, trying to see how much effect this numerically has, it's not actually very much, because the weight, even though you're having to spin these up like flywheels, it's still a minuscule amount of energy compared to accelerating the car itself. So unless you're going way to one end of the extremes, it's unlikely it will have a noticeable effect. But that steering effect is real. So rotating mass is a real thing. It can actually have some real effects on the handling of your car. So one other thing about rotating mass is it's not just a matter of how much it weighs, but where it is. The further out the weight is from the center of the center of the wheel, the more effect it has from a flywheel standpoint, effectively. The moment of inertia is greater. So which means that if you took this tiny little wheel, if you added a bunch of weight to this wheel and it was all right around the periphery, say a very heavy tire, it would have a much bigger effect than if I had a wheel with a lot of weight right near the center. It'd have a much bigger effect on the gyroscopic effects, on the flywheel effects, everything like that. So, do we have any questions yet?
Just a comment that it's a little quiet.
It's a little quiet. I'll do my best to yell at this. Sound is always a problem. So, let's talk about a couple of the things. The place where this conversation usually centers around is in wheels. And there's a good reason for that. One, because it's a great excuse to buy a new sexy looking set of wheels. But secondly, because this is probably the easiest place to affect your unsprung and rotating mass. Tire weights, they do vary a little bit. We'll start from the outside and work our way in. So the tire, when Mazda first introduced the Miata in 1990, they came with a very specific tire. It was the Bridgestone SF325 or what it was. We called them Bridge Rocks at the time. They weren't the stickiest tires, but they were very light. They were engineered to be very light because of this unsprung weight issue. It turns out there's not that much variation in tire weights. I ran a couple of numbers. I took the Bridgestone RE71 RS, which is the latest, hottest, stickiest Bridgestone. In the standard ND size, which is a 205 4517, they weigh 20 pounds. In the fat size that we use on our V8 cars, which is a 245 4017, significantly wider, they weigh 23 pounds. So it's heavier, but you're only talking 3 pounds difference between a 205 and a 245, and the effects of the actual tire itself are going to be much bigger than that small increase in weight. The wheel, as we said, is the place where we love to spend our money because, I mean, look at this. How could you not want that on your car? Deep silver, freshly available. I'll give you some weight variations on the wheels. And this is a 15 by 8, I think. A 15 by 7 wheel, which a lot of people who are looking for minimum weight will use. In the 15 by 7 version of this wheel is 11.7 pounds. The 15 by 8 is 12.4. So that extra inch of wheel width costs you about 0.7 of a pound. A 15 by 9 is 13.4. So it costs you a pound for that extra inch, plus all the extra structure that's required for it. But basically, you're getting about an extra pound of this rotating, unsprung weight for every inch of wheel width. That's assuming all the same wheel. The thing you got to watch out, though, is when you're looking around at wheels and you find a really sexy set of wheels from Rota or whoever your wheel manufacturer of choice is, there can be a significant increase in weight. For example, the 17 by 8 version of this wheel weighs effectively 16 pounds. It works quite well. It's an ND size. 2 out of 3 of the 17 by 8 ND wheels on Tire Rack are 22 pounds or more. So that's a 7-pound weight gain at least for 2/3 of the tire wheels that they sell on Tire Rack. So you've really got to pay attention to wheel weights when you're shopping. You can have, the difference between a 12-pound wheel and a 13-pound wheel, not significant. The difference between a 13-pound wheel and a 22-pound wheel, very significant. So if your vendor doesn't tell you what the wheel weight is, assume it's extremely high. If they do tell you what it is and it's way out of line, take that into consideration. It will have an effect in how your car rides. It will have an effect in how your car steers. You don't want to go too light. You don't want to sacrifice strength. Usually you end up sacrificing cost. You end up going with high-end forged wheels. Our Tobu wheels are beautifully light, beautifully strong. They are more expensive than a set of these, so you got to take that into account. So one of the questions we get is, can you actually tell the difference? Like on a street car, this sounds all very good in theory. Can you actually tell the difference on the street with wheel weight, with rotating mass, with unsprung weight? And the truth is you can. when you put on a really heavy set of wheels and tires, you can feel the whole car just feels dead. The response of the suspension dulls down. The ride gets much worse very quickly because, again, you're having trouble. The wheel can't move up and down fast enough to follow the road, so it's jumping over things, it's slamming into things, and it's moving the body of the car more because of all that extra mass. It just doesn't want to move, so something else has to. So you can really feel a difference in weight when you're driving around. Now, again, we concentrate on wheels, but there's other stuff inside the wheel that's both rotating and unsprung. The brake rotor's back there, or the brake rotor's back there. Now, the brake rotor has to have mass. You don't want to be too light on a brake rotor because its job is to absorb heat, amongst other things. It needs to be a big heat sink, and you need mass to do that. So brake rotors are made of cast iron, not exotic things like aluminum, because they have to be heavy. They have to absorb all that weight. But the brake caliper does not in the same way. It does to some extent. It's got to shed heat too, but basically factory calipers tend to be made of steel, two-piece steel. This is a factory ND caliper. This is another factory ND. This is the optional Brembo. Very big boy. This one is lighter, but an aftermarket. This is the caliper used on our Big Mama Jama brake kit. It's a 6-piston Willwood. Significantly larger, both of these, but it's lighter than these as well. So this is not rotating, but it is unsprung. And this can make a very big difference. Replacing a set of these with a set of our Little Big brake calipers, which are a small Willwood that is sized to work well for street autocross use, you can save 18 pounds of unsprung weight, total unsprung weight across the entire car, and that is significant. Think of what you'd have to spend on wheels to get to that point. So 18 pounds by going with a lighter caliper. It's got other attributes as well in terms of it's stiffer, sheds heat better, that sort of thing, but just in terms of sheer weight, you can really feel that in the car. The car feels lighter on its feet because literally it is. Do we have a question over there?
You pretty much covered it.
Okay. So, our tire weight's important. That's one of the questions. I think I handled that. Now, wheel and tire diameter. So is a 15-pound 15-inch wheel better than a 15-pound 17-inch wheel? That's one of the questions we got. The answer is you do want, if they both weigh the same, and they both have the same strength, hopefully, but one is smaller than the other, that weight's going to be more concentrated. The flywheel effect will be decreased. The unsprung weight will it'll make no difference on the unsprung weight. But if you do concentrate that mass closer to the center, it will have an effect. And really, wheel manufacturers could talk about the moment of inertia. Sorry about that noise. Moment of inertia of their wheels, because it really depends on where the weight is. If you have a wheel with a lot of weight around here, it'll be less responsive than a wheel that has a lot of its weight in here. You see weight variations on wheels with different offsets, and that's usually because of the mass that's right here. So that extra weight is not going to have a big effect on rotating mass, but it is still unsprung, so that's a problem. We'll turn this around so you can admire the pretty Kojeki. Look at that, so pretty. So one of the questions is, would a few extra pounds be negligible in a Miata with force induction as far as straight line acceleration and corner speed are concerned? So, as I mentioned earlier, the extra weight does not really affect acceleration as much as you'd think. Yes, you are spinning up the flywheels, but relative to the entire weight of the car, not as much as you'd think. And you see the same thing with flywheels on the engine as well. Engine flywheels going lighter there doesn't make as big a difference in terms of acceleration as you might expect, especially as the acceleration rate decreases as you get into higher gears. Corner speed can be affected by the wheel weight, because that gets into, can your wheel your tire stay in contact with the ground? Too much wheel weight and you're having trouble keeping that tire attached to the ground, has a big effect on your cornering speed. So if you're trying to justify a big, fat, heavy set of wheels because they look cool, they're not a performance choice. So keep that in mind. Make the decision based on what you know. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, there's a question here in the drifting world about extra wheel weight being useful for weight transfer to extend drift distances. I'm not sure what the thinking is there. I think that sounds like the sort of thing that people in the drift community are telling themselves, but doesn't actually have physics behind it. I don't know what the concept is about having heavier wheels for more weight transfer. It's not going to make you drift any further. Yeah. A heavier wheel, you don't have any more momentum to keep it sliding. Again, it's a very small percentage of the whole car. Yeah, I don't know I'm not sure what the concept is there, honestly. So here's one question. Is it better to prioritize lightweight or more grip? And that's going to come into what you use your car for. If you're driving around the track and you've got a stopwatch on you, more grip, definitely more grip, because that's going to be the fastest way around the track. If you're building a street toy, one to just play with, and you're more interested in purity of response, the same sort of reason you might do a high compression naturally aspirated engine instead of forced induction. If you're aiming for that feedback, that's when you might prioritize lightweight, because low grip is actually pretty fun on the street because you get to play at speeds that are not going to kill anybody. And lightweight really comes into that. So if you're building yourself a nice little corner carver, little canyon runner that is designed to satisfy you and not to gain bragging rights about the fastest one to run the Glenora Mountain Road or something like that, then you would want to prioritize probably lightweight over grip, because honestly, it will make it more fun. But in a performance standpoint, in just about every situation, grip is going to win. So you're going to want that fatter tire, you're going to want that fatter wheel, unless you mean you're adding tens of pounds to your whole system and you start running into trouble keeping your tires in contact with the ground. Do we have any more questions?
With Unsprung Weight, are aluminum lug nuts worth the addition?
So the question is, with Unsprung Weight, are aluminum lug nuts worth it? The actual weight savings from aluminum lug nut, that's a tough one, from aluminum lug nuts, aluminium for our upside down friends, is fairly small. The total, they feel very dense. I mean, they feel much lighter than the very dense steel ones, but honestly, the total weight savings is not that big. And if we look at rotating mass, they're obviously very close to the center of rotation, so they have a very small effect on the actual performance, the unsprung weight difference. So not that huge, honestly. They have some other attributes, but in terms of performance, you're not really going to see a difference whether you're running aluminum lug nuts or steel lug nuts. They work out about the same. Same goes for valves, tire valves too. Rubber tire valves and metal tire valves. Again, the weight difference, not enough to make a difference, but they have got other attributes, other reasons why you might want them. Do we have another one over there? Nope, that's everything. Okay, well, I think I've covered everything I was looking to cover. Semi-sprung weight. We'll talk about this a little bit. This is the stuff, if we zoom back in here, Travis, this is the stuff that partially moves. This control arm, for example, is semi-sprung because all of the wheel and tire has to go up and down, but only part of the control arm really kind of does. And the shock, literally, half of it doesn't. I mean, in this case, it's an inverted shock, so the body doesn't move. On a Miata, they're always the other way up. So the body's moving up and down, but the shaft isn't. And the spring itself, I mean, that is the half of it's moving, half of it isn't. So this stuff, a weight savings will have an effect, but not as much as having it hung way out on the end. So putting a bunch of money into aluminum control arms, for example, to try to save a pound or two, will have an effect, but not as much as taking a pound or two off the wheel, tire, rotor, caliper package. And the uprights as well, that's a little bit harder to change out. So I would concentrate on things like the calipers, things like the wheels, those the sort of the easy pickings. I mean, they have other capabilities as well. You can improve your braking capability with better rotor or better calipers. You can improve the style of your car and mount a wider tire, et cetera, with different wheels. So that's probably the best place to focus. Trying to save a pound or two on aluminum control arms, at that point you're starting to chase tiny, tiny fractions, and you definitely need to hit the low-hanging fruit first. So if there's no more questions, I'm going to call it for today. If you do have any more questions after this and you're watching this video in the future, then please put your questions in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them. And of course, if you do have specific questions about a specific application, you can always contact our customer service team at Flyin Miata. We have a bunch of very experienced techs on hand who are willing to answer your question and are there for a deep dive into your specific solution, your specific problem you're trying to solve. So if you like this kind of content, please like, comment, subscribe, all the usual stuff. You know the deal. We'll be back next week with another video on another subject. In the meantime, my name is Keith Tanner from Flyin Miata, and thanks for your attention.